himself lay on top of her, unmoving. Heart-pounding, Johansson ran as fast as he could to phone the police. He had never obviously seen anything like this in his entire life. And of course he had his children with him. All he wanted to do was go fishing. So as the police arrived, they found that 3 of the teens were dead, but miraculously Nils Gustafsson was still alive. At first glance, it looked like the assailant had cut the tent ropes before slashing and stabbing at the victims from outside. So it seemed that Gustafsson had been extraordinarily lucky, but this was all what was apparent at first. So he's rushed to the hospital. He has a concussion, head wounds, and a broken jaw. He cannot remember anything about what had happened. So he also a knife, a blunt object had been used in the fish's frenzy. The autopsies on the 8th of June found that Boisman had cuts to the face, a fractured jaw, cranial hemorrhage, and had been stabbed in the chest, stomach, lungs, and throat. The cause of death was internal bleeding. Nils' girlfriend, Mela Bjorklund, had bruising to the head and face, a fractured jaw, just like her boyfriend. He had a broken jaw, missing teeth, and numerous stab wounds, one of which had penetrated her cervical spine. For her, the cause of death was brain damage from blunt force trauma to the head. Boisman's girlfriend, Anya Maki, had a cranial fracture and bruising to the brain, and her cause of death was also brain damage due to blunt force trauma. That had to be some serious trauma, and very, very aggressive. But none of the victims had been sexually assaulted. This was not sexually, brought on. Nils Gustafsson had facial fractures, including a broken jaw and a wound on the side of his head, like we were saying before, above the left ear. He had also various superficial stab wounds and abrasions on the fingers of his left hand. A thorough search with metal detectors and lake divers turned up no murder weapons, but it did become apparent that things were missing from the tent. Keys to both motorbikes were gone, but the bikes themselves were still there. Inexplicably, Gustafsson and Boisman's shoes were found almost half a mile away, splattered with blood. Also, what was missing is a bag, a pair of chrome pliers, a penknife, Boisman's black leather jacket, and the boys' wallets, watches were all missing. Inside the wallets were their driver's licenses and motorcycle registry documents, as well as some money. A pillow case wrapped with a rubber band was found at the scene, contained blood and body fluids, which did not match any of the victims. It was later suggested that the pillowcase could have been there already and may not have been significant. Well, why would a pillowcase have blood and body fluids? also scattered around this scene, around this tent, were items belonging to the group, including a table knife, makeup items, food, cigarettes, gloves, and some partially full bottles of soft drinks and alcohol. The police were criticized for their investigation, which they say was flawed from the beginning to the end. They failed to close off the area. So curious campers, what did they do? Well, they stopped by, they visited the scene, they walked all over the scene, all over all of the evidence, touching it, picking it up, contaminating any physical evidence there might have been. The police actually questioned 4,000 people in this rural, small, sparsely populated town, including 100 known criminals from the local area, but never was a solid suspect emerging from any of this. Now, let's just kind of stop there and think about, out of 4,000 people, 100 of them were known suspect, like criminals, and they're out free. I don't know, I think that's kind of up the percentages a little bit high there. I think I could be totally wrong. I'm just saying that just sounds high for such a sparsely populated town to have that many criminals running around. But anyway, this is back in 1950, so there was no witnesses at all to the crime. However, about 6 a.m., 2 11-year-old birdwatchers named Heikki Salonen and Marty, I think that's how you say it, Appalachian, heard a noise. I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names. I don't speak Finnish, so. Looking closer, they saw the tent and motorcycles, and there was a man lying on top of the tent, they said, who they thought was sunbathing, and a blonde man walking eastward towards the shore. It should be noted that the word they used to describe the man's hair when translated into English means blonde, but in the native Finnish it also means light brown. So in translation it may have been one or the other. They could not see much further as the motorcycles were blocking their view, but these young boys, they moved westward and came across 14-year-old Olavi Kivalani, who was waiting for his friends to join him for a morning of fishing. So this was a very popular fishing area for very young children. I mean, I don't know, but I would not. Maybe it's because it's, the 50s compared to now, but I wouldn't let my 11-year-old just go down fishing at 6 a.m. without me supervising. Even then, I don't know. Especially with other teenagers that are there, and the parents had to have known that other teenagers would be around. And you know what happens when teenagers get together? It can be disaster waiting to happen. So, for his morning of fishing, his friends were going to join him. But questioned later, Olavi claimed to have arrived at 4 a.m. but heard nothing. Around 6 a.m. he did see a man walking towards the nearby Vesta waterworks site, hurrying away from what we now know is the direction of the murder cape. He was between 20 and 30 years old, 5'5", short-sighted, so may not have been able to see clearly from a distance. So he couldn't see if he was way too far away to see, I don't know if he could even really tell his age. I mean, his height maybe, but if he was short-sighted, it would be really difficult for him to know exactly how old this guy was, I would imagine. I don't know. But he waited in the area for several hours, but his friends stood him up. Eventually, he left around 8 a.m. Survivor Nils Gustafsson spent several weeks in the hospital. He never regained all his memories from that night, but he agreed to undergo hypnosis. Hypnotist Dr. Asser Stenbeck delved into Gustafsson's memories at 3 separate occasions between the 2nd and the 5th of July, so about a month later, to find that the killer was not someone he knew. Gustafsson described the attacker also as a 20 to 30-year-old between 5'7" and 5'10", with long blonde hair combed backwards. He had big eyes, a round face with acne on the forehead and cheeks, thick lips, a prominent jawline, and a short neck, and wearing a green and black checkered sweater. So that was pretty close to the younger boy's description, who was short-sighted. It was pretty darn good. Gustafsson remembers he's now under hypnosis. He remembers hearing the girl screaming and thought the man was carrying a knife in a metal bar or pipe-like object. 14-year-old Olavi was also hypnotized several times and confirmed the description given by Gustafsson. Although he was short-sighted, it is unclear how hypnosis could suddenly enable him to see with greater clarity. That's what I was just thinking. If he couldn't see, right? So why would hypnosis all of a sudden give him eyes? I don't know something seems a little bit, strange here. It has been argued that hypnotism has no place in criminal investigations. We've all had this argument. But, because it can lead to false memories just because of what you hear in the news, especially in 1950, and everybody seeing the crime scene and giving their own description. I'm sure Olavi had heard all this before he went under hypnosis. So it could have been just his brain just reenacting something, putting something together that would give the police something he was trying to help. Who knows? So at the time, the Finnish police had, minimal experience with using hypnosis to assist in murder cases. So, what I'm asking myself right now, and I'm sure you are, who are the suspects? Who is even around that area? Now, remember what I said. It's a very sparsely populated area. They interviewed 4,000 people, 100 criminals. I mean, did they come up with any suspects that were even close to looking like this, what these two described? So apart from various characters who were eliminated as possibilities, including an ex-convict on the run from reform school who hung himself on the anniversary of the murders, there were some who stood out more likely than others. So, Gilstrom, kiosk man. So Carl Valdemar Gilstrom ran a kiosk on the road near the Vesto Waterworks. He sold soda, ice cream, and gum. He was known for overly protecting and guarding the road leading to the waterworks and took a violence, and anyone driving up and down in that area been reported to the police for being aggressive towards campers and fishermen, and he had cut down their tents in the past and even thrown rocks at them just for being there. Well, that's a little suspicious. So allegedly, he had confessed to the murders while drunk in a sauna with a neighbor. Well, drinking in a sauna could possibly lead to dehydration, confusion, and so there's a question how serious this is. Guarded that area. He was seen filling up one of the wells on his land shortly after the murder, and the police brought in dogs to search the area as they thought he would be trying to hide the murder weapons. But nothing was ever found or incriminating, and he had an alibi. His wife claimed he was home with her all night in 1969. Gilstrom was said to have drowned himself in Lake Bodom, which some saw as a sign of guilt. Others argued it was an accident. Years later, when his wife passed away on her deathbed, she recanted her alibi, saying that her husband had threatened to kill her if she did not provide it and was worried about what he might do to their sons. So she gave that alibi just to protect him from something. And maybe he was innocent or maybe he was guilty. It seems to me more guilty than innocent, but he could have just been out that night and he didn't want to be, just automatically guilty because he was out. Having a solid alibi is better than just saying, well, I was out fishing in that area. They happened to die. So, very little else is known about Gilstrom, although he was known to have a bad temper and locals favored him as the most likely suspect. There was no real evidence. Nobody took his confession seriously. The case was so circumstantial that it would be really hard to try. Think that if he would have been the murderer, witnesses would also have been more likely to recognize him because he was so well known in the area. Remember, people knew that he had a temper. They knew that he owned this stand right there where they camped, and he had, been known to slash the tents of people but not kill anybody. So, what is so chilling about Gilstrom? He was not just the only suspect in this case to kill himself. The suicide rates in Finland were particularly high between the 50s and the 90s, well above the average for an EU country. That's interesting. So, what's the next suspect? Hans Assmann, the spy. So another suspect, and the police seemed more likely to be interested in. For many years, I guess, the police had really gone after this guy. Morphine and amphetamine addict Hans Assmann was originally from Germany and claimed to have worked for a guard at Auschwitz before being sent to the Eastern Front and being recruited as a KGB spy. On the day after the Lake Bodom murders, he presented at the Helsinki Surgical Hospital with dirt under his fingernails and suspicious red stains all over his clothes, which turned out to only be paint. In an interview, Dr. Palo, a student doctor at the time, said, quote, "A strange-looking blonde-haired man identifying himself as Hans Assmann came to our hospital sometime after the murders. He arrived alone. I was a student at the time working under the supervision needle, but soon went back to pretending to be unconscious. Of course, by that time, they didn't believe him at all. They knew he was acting. Now, their initial and, I guess, long-lasting impression of this guy was he was there to seek shelter and was not genuinely seeking medical care because he had dirt under his fingers and he had paint on him, but he was not hurt. So, that was very strange to all of the doctors. They found that to be bizarre. They called the police after suspecting Nussman may have done something bad. But here's the thing, even though the police found him a good candidate for this crime, they never came to the hospital at that moment after they called the policeman to collect clothes or to interrogate him. But he had blonde hair, about 5'7", in his 30s. So, I don't know, the lead investigator believed that he had something to do with the murder of those children at the lake. He really did. After all, his clothes were dirty, shoes covered in dirt. If he had run a mile in a forest, but how about the kids' shoes? So, the appearance of a crazed man, I mean, if he's addicted to methamphetamine and morphine, yes, he's beyond crazed, and what he's seen and done, I'm sure. This investigator believed strongly that he did have something to do with these deaths, and so Dr. Paulo was as well. He was convinced that Usman was definitely guilty. And matter of fact, he wrote 3 books about Usman's guilt. And what happened that day? The police never followed up on the doctor's suspicions and did not examine his clothes. He had an alibi for the night of the murders, as he had been staying with his girlfriend, her sister, and brother-in-law, who were sure he could not have left the house without their noticing. So that's a pretty strong alibi, and you're not going to get 3 people, maybe 1, your wife, maybe. But these are people that probably would not take that to their grave. And they were sure that they would have noticed if he had left the house. And if he had committed the murders, why turn up at the hospital a whole day and a half later anyway? So this is a day and a half after the murders he had shown up at the hospital. Yes, very strange, but the fact he was on so many drugs and had gone through so much, and who knows, he could have been running from the, KGB or God knows who, in his mind. But he didn't have any blood on him. He had red paint, and nobody had red paint at the scene. Okay, so let's look at this. Man is the suspect. If he was really involved in the murders and he shows up a day and a half after the murders, that means he was walking around for a day and a half. All that time when people knew that these children had been killed with stains and dirt under his fingernails, and he looked like a crazed person with blonde hair, same height. I don't know. That seems like a little bit far-fetched for me, but maybe not. I don't know how. I've never seen it, so I don't know how deep the woods by the lake are. They could be extremely deep, and he could have easily hid. A few witnesses who saw someone at the lake had reported a man with long blonde hair as well, who met Usman's description, and then he made himself look even more suspicious by cutting his hair shortly afterwards. Gustafson's description of the killer under hypnosis also matched Usman, but he had no blood on him, and if you're going to do that much, it would seem if you're going to stab, I mean, that's a personal thing, and you'd have blood all over you, not just some red paint. And he never had any of their possessions on him. Their keys, remember, their keys were gone. Their wallets, murder weapons, none of that was found. He did live less than 5 kilometers from the campsite. On his deathbed, he hinted at his involvement in 1953 murder of the schoolgirl Kaliki, but there is no evidence for this. I mean, who knows? When you're on that much, like I said, that many drugs, you don't know what's real and what's not. So some people believe that Osmond had been seen in a photo taken at the funeral of the 3 victims. However, this person was never identified officially, really. I mean, it was never identified, never talked to, never, if somebody had taken a picture of Osmond at the funeral, and there was a rumor going around this small town, why isn't this person being brought in? I don't know, something just does not. This is a very strange case, and this is why I wanted to do it, because, and apparently there is a picture, and it does sort of resemble Osmond, but if it's an aged 50-year-old man, so it didn't look anything like him at the time. Some conspiracy theorists argue that the police were reluctant to pursue Osmond because of his ties to the KGB, but that was never proved, even that he was an agent. I don't know, I personally think, okay, here's my personal take on this. I think that he was on too many drugs, and there was no blood on him. He's running around, yeah, he had blonde hair, but I mean, that was the 50s, 60s, I mean, come on. He thrived on attention, infamy, he was kind of like a fantasy lover. He wanted to be in this kind of fantasy world. He would tell stories about Auschwitz and scaring the nurses, and how he was on the front lines, and this, and it just, I mean, he freely admitting he was a KGB spy. I don't know, this personally seems to me a little too in your face kind of thing. And people do this all the time. We see this all the time. People are eager to confess to crimes they did not commit. Just because they want to be in the spotlight. They're very interesting people, but they seem very suspicious at the time, but in reality have nothing to do with the murder. But here comes the twist and the turn. There was a double murder in eastern Finland just 10 months before Lake Bodom case, which was very similar to the four young teenagers. The two young women in the early 20s, a nursing assistant and Rita, post office worker, were murdered at Tulilahti while on a cycling holiday. So how were they killed? They were killed by stabbing and bludgeoning, and were stripped naked before being buried in a shallow grave. Their tent was torn, money had been stolen, their wrist watches were ripped off their bodies, but they were found nearby, so their belongings were found. Having stopped at 3:27 a.m., it seems an interesting coincidence. Less than a year later, the Lake Bodom victims' watches would also be taken. So, can you ask yourself, is this a work of a serial killer? Because that case has never been solved either. it goes cold for 40 years until March 2004. There is an arrest made. And this is who I was thinking all along. None other than Nils Gustafsson, the boyfriend that was of the one gal that had been dating for 3 weeks. The survivor. I was thinking that from the beginning. So, he's over 60 years old, working as a school bus driver, married, had 2 grown children, and he had always been cooperative with the police. I mean, they never found him to be, argumentative. And he had to live with this trauma of losing his friends every day and every night. He strongly denied any guilt. And even in a press conference before the trial, he stated that the last memory, they were all saying goodnight to each other. And the next thing he woke up in a Red Cross center. But however, remember he said the girls were screaming. So how did he, I guess that was under hypnosis, but still. But he says that he wakes up in a Red Cross center. That's all he remembers. So they say goodnight. Next thing you know, he's in the hospital. Because he didn't remember anything, the question is, how do you know you're innocent? Maybe you had a blackout from the crime. Maybe you've chosen to put it out of your mind. And he says, quote, "I am innocent and that is that," unquote. So, since his arrest, he has been under a lot of strain, and he became very agitated and irritated with the reporters, which put him down for having a bad temper. Something that was just underneath all of this nice facade is what they kind of alluded to. So what was it that made the police say, you know what, I think it was you after 35 years? As forensics had improved over the last few decades, they could now analyze the blood on the shoes. What they found was very interesting. The blood of all 3 Bodom victims was on Gustafsson's shoes, found abandoned half a mile away, but his own blood was mysteriously absent. The shoes belonging to the other victims had blood splattered inside them, so not had been worn at the time of the murder, while Gustafsson's shoes had no blood splatter inside, only outside, suggesting they must have been on his feet at the time. For some reason he would have taken off the shoes, I don't know. So the prosecution is their explanation is a little bit inconsistent. One of their pretrial statements says the following, quote, "This violent crime took place outside the tent. We believe that Gustafsson killed Boisman first by stabbing him in the neck and then used a combination of rock and a knife to kill the others. When he realized it would appear more believable that a third party had committed the murder, he went about staging it." So, unquote. So it goes on in the court records to say that he started by cutting the tent to make it look like it had collapsed, trapping the victims inside. Then he stabbed holes in the tent. Gustafson is the perpetrator, and an imaginative one at that, they say in the court records. I don't know. It sounds like they were saying that he had killed the victims outside the tent before, then staging the entire crime, thinking that, oh God, I better stage this. But I mean, what is the premeditation for this? I mean, was he violent before? He had known this other kid all his life. Why would he kill him now at 16? I know that doesn't make any sense to me. Let me know in the comments what you think, because they're saying it also suggests that everybody except Noel Gustafson had been standing around outside the tent without their shoes on. Okay, so they're all standing around outside, and he starts to stab one, and he stabs the other two without them even trying to run away. Their statements, the prosecution then changes their statements. It's evolving now. So they're saying they had arrived, foursome had arrived Saturday, June 4th, 1960, around 6 to 7 p.m. They set up the tent. They were having fun, spent time together, and for some reason, they visited another group camping about a kilometer away. So apparently, they suggested that Nels was already drunk, and he started arguing with his closest friend, Boisman. So a witness now has come about and stated that the argument was about the girls. But this is just really coming to light here. After the group returned to their tent, the fighting continued. This is what the prosecution is saying. The rest of the group shut Gustafson out of the tent and closed the opening. In a fit of rage, he ripped holes in the tent's exterior and cut ropes which were keeping it up, causing it to collapse. So then he assaults Boisman, who defended himself by kicking him, breaking his jaw. Then he viciously stabs him in the throat and attacked him with a rock. So the prosecution first says they were all standing around and he starts stabbing him. And then the second time it evolved to he was really drunk. They went and visited another set of campers that said they were arguing about the girls. But where are these campers are only a kilometer away? Aren't they hearing anything? Where were their statements? This is very interesting. So this is my question. As I read this case, I was thinking, it is still truly unsolved, but how it's like they couldn't pinpoint who did it. So I understand about the shoes, but where did he get these weapons? Did he bring them? He said he attacked him with a rock, but initially the police said that they had been hit with it like a tire iron and a knife, not just random objects near the tent. So they said after he used it again to hit another one of the friends, fracturing her jaw, his friend's girlfriend, and breaking her teeth and then stabbing her multiple times. So where did he dispose of these weapons? The prosecution is saying that Gustafson must have disposed of the weapons and other missing items by sinking them in the lake or burying them. Okay, well, we know that they dredged the lake and nothing was found. And then he had injuries with his fight with policemen. The stains on Gustafson's shoes showed that they were on his feet when the crime was committed. Okay, and there was only blood on the outside and not in the void. Okay, well, let me tell you something. Some people like to go barefoot, especially if they're camping near water. And like me, I'm a flip-flop person. I have this weird thing about my feet, so maybe he had the same thing. Maybe he just wanted to wear shoes and nobody else was wearing shoes, because I've had a lot of friends who would go barefoot all summer long, and I would always be in shoes. I don't know. He did not have any defensive wounds. The medical report showed that he was fully functional even with his injuries, and they haven't caused him any real loss of consciousness or decreased mobility. So he didn't have any brain damage or memory degradation. So if he wasn't the killer, then he should have been able to call for help. Alright, now the prosecution has said that he is short-tempered and violent by nature. But he's married, has 2 grown children, at the same job. He's a bus driver, larger than anyone else in the group. He is 6 feet in height, and the other victims were around 5'6" and under. So this makes him more of a threat, I guess, but remember, there's other witnesses that saw a long, blonde-haired man walking away from the murder scene. Why wouldn't that man call the police? Was that the other, who were these other people, these other campers? Why didn't they call? Why didn't they run for help? They said, the prosecution says that he is, because of his temper, he is more than capable of committing the murders. I don't know. Even after the event, he was claimed to have exaggerated all of his injuries, drawing the attention away from him. So in conclusion, alright, this is what they say in conclusion. This is straight up from the court's documents from the prosecution. Nils Gustafsson is the only viable suspect and has been falsely seen as a victim. Okay, well, since Gustafsson's girlfriend bore the brunt of the attacker's rage, that also kind of pushed the prosecution to think that, it was stabbed 15 times, with the attack continuing after she was dead, so she was definitely the focal point of the crime. So it's very personal. Crimes are usually committed by somebody they know. But, and that when it's really personal, they, stabbing, it's more of a, when they're stabbed that many times, it's very personal. That person's very angry at them. Not always. So prosecution is arguing that the blunt object used was a rock and not a pipe like the object that Gustafsson mentioned during his hypnosis. So to me it seems like they're kind of twisting it to what their ideology is about this case. There was never a rock found with blood on it, and they never explained why they believed it was a rock. Remember, the murder weapons were never recovered, so there's no evidence. But a pipe-like object would definitely suggest an external killer. It's very unlikely was only taken from a few blood samples, not all of them. So they definitely could have missed some DNA. Or maybe he didn't leave any DNA at all because he all got them by surprise. Maybe it was an ex to the gal, his girlfriend. They had only been dating 3 weeks. I mean, where's her background? Maybe that's where that rage came from. I don't know. So the 3 doctors testified that amnesia in this situation was very likely. Gustafsson would not have been able to drag out his hospital stay for so long if his injuries were as minor as the prosecution claims. Now this is the defense talking, and this is the doctors saying, they're confirming that he was severely traumatized by this. Blood splatter evidence was also found to be consistent with Gustafsson being inside the tent at the time of the attack, with injuries warranting a 3 or 4 week stay in the hospital. So it wasn't just a little slap around, like the prosecution is trying to say. I mean, this guy was in the hospital for 3 or 4 weeks, and he did have an amnesia according to the doctors. And the doctors even say right here in the court documents, it says it's unlikely he would have been strong enough to walk half a mile and back to hide his shoes. He would have also risked being spotted by all the people that they had been talking to. I mean, if I'm, only a kilometer away from somebody, and then there's all these other fishermen and, young kids coming to fish at the time, he would have been seen. So I want to know about the group. They went to another party's tent. So this came from a testimony of a witness who only came forward in 2004. This person claims, quote, "We were camping at the camping area by the Bodom group where we're at the tip of the peninsula that doesn't belong to the camping area. You can still camp in the peninsula. The Bodom group were of a similar age to us, and that evening we arrived at the general camping area. They drank a small amount of alcohol. Sometime during that evening, the Bodom group visited us from the peninsula after seeing us there. I guess the boys got into an argument over the girls. They made so much noise, we asked them to leave. After they left, they go back to their tent. We could still hear them arguing and shouting. I then heard a motorbike start up, and I thought, oh my God, is that foolish drunk boy really going to ride his motorbike? It's clear in our minds they visited our camp that evening. It is also clear to me who murdered them because it was done spontaneously and not planned ahead. There is confusion as if this were a man or a woman. And they did not come forward for all of those years until 2004. They were never identified because they did not want to identify themselves. And partly because they are Finnish. And their language is gender neutral, so nobody could tell if it was a man or a woman. However, researching this case, so the original Finnish recording of this unidentified, non-gender human being that apparently was there, that never came forward until 2004. They have confirmed it was a man. The witness's reliability is highly questionable. Why would he wait 44 years to tell his story if he had nothing to do with it? So he's caught when he was not in court because he could not remember the names of his own friends. Because remember, there was another group, there's other people he was with, and he just forgot the names of the friends, but could remember all of this other stuff conveniently. But he couldn't remember the people was no route between the two campsites in 1960 that they could have actually traveled through. If the teenagers visited another campsite that night and started an argument, it is very strange that since she wrote everything down in her diary and nothing was said, she would have definitely said there was an argument, there was some kind of, they had visited other campers, something. Nothing. Instead, she just gave boring details about the boys gone fishing. Wild or bizarre, if something crazy happened down in her diary. So on October 7th, 2005, all charges against Gustafson were unanimously rejected. The prosecution chose not to pursue the case further, implying they knew their evidence was weak. Gustafson received compensation for his ordeal, so he got paid money because they had put him through the ringer. What do you think about this case? Have you heard of this case? I had never heard of this case. I just started reading about very odd cases in other countries and I came across this. Now I've seen the Lake Bodom murders, but I never really dove deep into it. But as I was reading, I was like, well, this is really interesting. Because somebody, here's the thing, it doesn't matter who did it, somebody had to do it. And all of those suicides between 1960 and 1990, how bizarre is that? And two people that could have possibly have been suspects or the murderers both killed themselves. Fantasy guy, but I don't think, honestly, I don't think he did it. I just think he was running from something in his mind. So this is what Gustafson, prior to 2004, was, all his interviews were professionally translated. It says, question, tell us about your relationship with Seppo, Boisman, and the girls. They were childhood friends from early 50s. I visited him at home. He had gotten to know the girls before me. And what he said is I probably had known them for 3 weeks. After the trip, we were planning to go to Melia's house for coffee and birthday cake, but of course that never happened. Second question, what did you do that day? They rented a tent. He told him it was an old-fashioned design from the 40s, which did not have a zippered front, but instead tie strings for the doorway. Have killed the idea that they locked him out, they zipped him out because it did not have a zipper. He and his friend, they went to the cafe. Remember the cafe? The guy sold soda and ice cream and gum. Well, the kiosk owner wife said I stopped there too, but that's not true. But she also said on her deathbed that he was lying about an alibi. That he threatened to kill her and her boys if she said that he wasn't there that night. He said they had tried fishing, but had no worms, only bread. But the fish were not hungry. And then they picked up the girls and arrived back at the lake between 6 and 7 p.m. Set up the tent together. in either the 4th or 5th or 6th of June when this all happened. So he does miss his friends. I mean, they had known each other for years. And he has stayed in touch with the parents. He didn't have any guilt. I mean, you would think that he would have guilt, that he would have shied away from, he didn't do anything suspicious. I mean, it's really hard for me to think that a teenager would murder like that, just out of nowhere, without having any prior signs that this might happen. I just logically, looking through a logical mind, I think he's innocent. And the 3 doctors are all saying how, he did have this amnesia. He was in the hospital for 3 or 4 weeks. So he wasn't, just like the prosecution said, making up his injuries. The 3 doctors apparently had documented that cerebral spinal fluid was exuding from Gustafson's nose. That is a sign of having an extremely severe head fracture. You're not going to have brain fluid coming out of your nose if it's just a little kick in the head or in the jaw. This is still an unsolved case. The Lake Bodom murders in Finland. This is the first time I really read so much about this. It had to have been somebody else, somebody with a motive, somebody who is a killer by nature. There's no way he could hurt himself so bad that he had brain fluid coming out of his nose. I mean, when you really look deeper into this case, you will find that this man was very consistent, did actually spend 3 or 4 weeks in the hospital, did have amnesia. The doctors, all 3 doctors said that. Why be so jealous of somebody you just met, and then you're best friends with somebody, and then you just decide that you're going to be jealous of him? I mean, there was nothing. The argument was over nothing. Or nobody had any. The argument was over the girls, but why would it be over the girls? For what reason? The one had been dating the guy for a while, a long time. His friend, Gustafson's relationship would have been exciting, and there would be no arguing. None of this makes sense at all to me. Let me know what you think. I'm very curious because I don't do a lot of unsolved cases, but I thought this was very interesting and unique. And who do you think it is? But I appreciate you listening to All True Crime with Jody. I love you all. Stay safe. Please, if you like, hit the subscribe button. I do lots of different content, lots of different characters. Read scary stories, true crime. Because I put out so many videos, I hate to do all true crime because that's just a lot of true crime, and it's a lot on me emotionally. So I find having different content on my channel is a way to balance it out and relax, because it is ASMR. Please be safe. Hit the like button. Please comment. Please comment. I'm so curious to know what you think about this. Now that you've heard, I read the court documents to you, what the prosecution said, what the doctor said, what the defense said, how they actually had to pay him because, retribution, because they had harassed him so much. And how about the other ice cream soda gum stand to be very suspicious to me. I think the other guy was in his own fantasy world, and God knows if he